very pleased to welcome our next speaker to the stage. OneTrust is in the house. Arshdeep Sood is the Senior Strategic Solutions Engineer at OneTrust, which builds the trust intelligence platform, connecting privacy, GRC, ethics, and ESG teams, data, and processes, so companies big and small can collaborate seamlessly to put trust at the center of their operations and culture. And Ted Sfikas, our very own Senior Director of Digital Strategy and Value Engineering. He has been a leader at Tealium for more than 8 years, and he is in high demand to speak at events, conferences, and with our partners about the ways technology can help automate trusted, compliant customer experiences. So now these strategic minds are about to enlighten us on future-proofing your data privacy and compliance efforts. Get your notebooks ready, and please help me in welcoming them both to the Digital Velocity stage. Ted, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and welcome everybody to Digital Velocity. I'd like to introduce the topic that we'll be discussing with Arshdeep from OneTrust as probably one of the most prominent topics that we need to talk about today, both in digital marketing and in ad tech. Wouldn't you agree, Arshdeep?
Oh, absolutely. I've been with OneTrust for almost 5 years now, and we've been living and breathing this experience. And the partnership that we're working with Tealium on is just absolutely going to take this industry by wave. So really excited to be here.
Well, thanks for coming, and we appreciate your insight on some of these things. Why don't we go to the first slide now and take a look at the expansion of consumer rights with different privacy. And Arshdeep, I'd love to have your point of view on the lowest common denominator commonalities between them from the OneTrust perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was glad that Jeff actually brought up that global perspective to all these regulations. And we were discussing how he has had this vision since the past 10, 11 years that this is going to be taking the wave. So with the globe, we have seen so many different regulations pioneer GDPR coming through, but US really started its wave in 2020 with a CCPA that was for California.
Yeah.
Over the past 2 or so years, there were so many conversations across states because consumers is what they call it in California. I personally like to call them end users. Being an engineer, it just is an easier language to go with. That they are becoming so aware, we're all moving into a world of big data, that it's so important to be able to align with these regulations to give some power back to the end user to control how personalization works for them. And this year, we are seeing actually 6 different states come up with their own regulations. So CPRA with California, CDPA with Virginia, we have CPA, UCPA, and CDDP, that's Connecticut, Utah, Colorado, and then Iowa also came up with theirs, I would say 29th of March. All of them have the same agenda, like I mentioned, focus on giving users the power to control the data that you as a business have on them, or the kind of personalization that gets delivered to them. And then as they give these consumer rights, they started giving these end users the ability to access and see what kind of data, or get that amended or get that deleted. But the one that I feel has taken the industry by wave has been the right to opt out from sale or share or sensitive information or behavioral targeting. And that's been augmented also by the whole conversation around third-party cookies going away. So I love the fact that we're talking about digital velocity, because we are all on a digital world, and this is going to impact everyone so much in a way that you need to now think of a partnership with the end users than just being these organizations gathering data and trying to figure out what works for them. So when you asked about the common denominator, I love this slide because it really tells us that each regulation comes from that same motivation. The language or the verbiage they might be using is a little different. And in the next slide, we actually dive into one of those popular use cases that I have seen this year, which was around global privacy control. So global privacy control, being this browser signal, gives end users the ability to say that as soon as I show up on your site, I want to exercise an opt-out. And it is important that you honor those choices to, one, be safeguarded from a regulatory and compliance perspective, but also to ensure that all the experiences you deliver to your audience members are succinct and in alignment to that. So when you're thinking about delivering a compliant, consumer-friendly experience and ensuring that the data set that lives within Tealium and is provided with the best kind of data set, consent becomes a very critical part in accelerating that. And so having that signal being connected to you honoring the tracking or the web trackers being deployed, and having a CMP banner that talks about, hey, as a business, we do drop trackers, and we understand that you might or might not want some of them being fired, but here are the benefits, here's the value exchange. And that kind of a dialogue didn't ever exist in the past. So I personally am really enjoying how people are thinking of this from a different handshake perspective, and working towards augmenting that personalized data set or the kind of data that comes into your CDP with consent, because now you know that the data that you have on file actually makes the most sense to the user that you're working with. So I actually would love to hear from you, Ted. Like, how are you seeing with consent? How is CDP being augmented with that information and consent playing its role there?
Yeah, I really like this graphic because in the first two squares, it implicitly highlights the importance of a brand communicating the value exchange with their consumers or their end users in real time. This must be done in real time. It can't be done after the fact. And there's a couple of benefits for both the business, the brand, and the consumer if you have that kind of technology in place. Number one, the experience improves. The personalization approaches that we can take as a brand to fully improve the CX that our consumers are seeing instantly becomes known to the brand. And in the rightmost squares, you highlight the importance of the integration of this data with a entity like a CDP, which in turn is connected to those systems that make this real-time thing happen. So one of the most important things that I've been hearing from our partners and strategy leaders throughout the nation today is that while the first-party data tranche today is quite low, society is slowly starting to see the benefits of opting in instead of saying, no, don't advertise to me. With OneTrust's technology, what I particularly like about it is we take out all the noise, and we actually tell you what you're going to get when you consent, and you can actually toggle between the platforms that you as a consumer enjoy to use outside the brand, like Meta or Snap or TikTok, as opposed to profiling, which was new to CPRA in 2023. They actually made a distinction for that word. And when you hear that word, you think customer data platform, the brand's learning about me, it begins to profile. So tying these signals like GPC is going to be critical for the future. And I'm glad to see that OneTrust and Tealium have worked together to be ahead of the game for this. It's still in its infancy today, but I predict that within the short term, we're going to have consumers not only opt in to get a better experience, but we'll see that first-party data tranche begin to rise. And it's not only Tealium who believes this. Check out all the other vendors in the industry today, like the Trade Desk and so forth. They're ready for this first-party experience across the open web. Why don't we move on to the next slide now and talk about the modality of data and how it enters and presents itself to our brand. And this one, Arshdeep, I think this is really, really important because a lot of our clients here at Tealium, most of their traffic is unknown. We forget about that. There's big problems with being accurate with your data. And that's why the right to rectification in 2023 surfaced as one of the new data subject access requests. What can you tell us about how OneTrust works with systems to not only detect the unknown, but make them known, bring some fidelity to that silhouette that we see on the site?
Yeah, I actually echo everything that you have been saying about how trends are moving towards first-party data capture. It's really important for all of us to realize that anybody who resolves our domain or our URL on their browser is going to start off being anonymous. They need to log in, they need to identify, could be a probabilistic or a deterministic identifier. OneTrust can work with either, but if you want to actually take your relationship with the end user a step further, that's the route to go. And first-party data capture has become a big conversation ever since Google keeps talking about deprecating third-party cookies and then again talks about it and hopefully gets there in 2024.
Mhm.
So in this graphic that we have here, it's really to say that when the user shows up, maybe they're just visiting to buy a t-shirt on your retail brand. They're unknown. They have these trackers that are being dropped from the region that they come from. You want to make sure that they get the right consent mechanism delivered, be it an opt-in or an opt-out. But you want to make sure that anything that's associated with their digital presence as that instance and any tracking that's associated to that is consent-based. And then as this user says, hey, I really like the content that I see here. They are a brand that can be trusted because they showed me a CMP banner. They're honoring the personalization. They're not just overshadowing me or sharing my information with third parties. When I said, no, I would like to actually build an account with them or sign up or even a registration form or a newsletter subscription form, any form of first party data capture can quantify of this user converting into a known user. And then that's when you take that next step with building a life cycle around that engagement. And I would personally say that your duties towards these end users become furthermore because now they are engaged with you. They are trusting you with more data. To your point that people are becoming more aware and they want to give you more opt-ins, it is a fact. If people go and read reports about GDPR from 2018 to now, the opt-in rates are going higher up than you would have expected because consumers also want personalization. I want to not just keep seeing stuff that doesn't make sense to me. And I'm ready to give that at a value exchange. So when you have this known user engagement, you're not only delivering to them the right experience, but also showcasing that they as end users have more control on their data, be it exercising a right to deletion, access, or managing smaller aspects of consent like I created an account, I love the product, send me one notification a week instead of 15. Small nuanced updates and personalization segments will take it a long way. And when we keep talking about future proofing your strategy, I genuinely believe this is an external force. It's not going to go away. So if you can A/B test, if you can figure out what works and what options and custom preferences align with your audience, using the data set you have today, it's going to take you a long way, especially when you think about translating that to CDPs like Tealium, where they're going to optimize it like nobody's business and help you get the best profiles out. So I completely agree with you. This kind of slide helps me personally visualize the whole journey. And on the next slide, I do actually have this bifurcation on when people think about unidentified and identified individuals. I've had conversations where people would say, hey, we have never had a logged in experience, or we don't identify users. So none of this matters to me. But the answer is not that. A CMP, from a compliance perspective or a trust building perspective, anonymous users are the most important to capture because they could be just anybody out there with any kind of an agenda. And then you have these known users who are ready to trust you for the kind of brand that you are, and they want to engage with you for different purposes. So as you build these experiences for these different types of personas, if you have not thought of having identified users, now would be the time of considering and thinking deterministic, probabilistic, absolute known, open. There's technology to support you with that, but really focusing on if I'm giving an anonymous user the ability to explore my website or my mobile applications or my CTV applications, they should have the ability to manage their choices, the way we track them, the way we personalize and deliver information points to them. And we need to honor these different consent models and browser signals that are up and coming. And at the same time, if I have a known relationship, I need to give them more control on the kind of data. And when I give them control, it's not just a nuclear opt-out or opt-in, but the ability to tell me how exactly does a communication work for them and what means most to them. Maybe they love seasonal notifications and that's all what they care for. Then I might just start sending them emails in October all the way through Christmas, and making sure that my downstream systems are informed of that and are activated to action accordingly. And I think this is where Tealium plays a great role with us in ensuring that that personalization gets delivered. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Ted. Like, where are you all going on for this?
Yeah, this is the first knock on the door, essentially, when people come to your business and experience your brand. And it's at that moment in time that I feel data orchestration and governance is at its most critical state. This is where you get a chance as a brand to sit down and say, welcome to the business. And the first order of business is the stewardship of your data. And the more options you provide, the more transparency you give in that first initial handshake determines everything. The value exchange is top of mind. And you can see between the bifurcation that you mentioned here, we're not only thanking people that we know their names, we're welcoming the silhouettes that we don't see the full picture yet. And we're enticing them to give us their data, which they know by now is extremely valuable to the business, and we promise to take care of it. So it's the most important part, and having your systems connected to that touch point, whether it's a website, whether it's an app, whether it's a clerk who's put it in a CRM, we've got to treat those touch points the same. And you need an entity in the middle that aggregates this information, ties it to a unified profile, and automates its distribution. Don't leave the data orchestration in the hands of humans. We make mistakes, but automated distribution solves that problem and mitigates the risk that you as a brand might make a mistake with this kind of information. So I believe that this is a really good transition to your next slide as well, Arshdeep, that I'd love to have you talk about that flow.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the fact about identifiers as we were going through this. So when we think about future proofing, as a business, you might be someone who's just starting out with a website. That's pretty much the first thing anybody wants to go to when you want a digital presence. But to Jeff's point originally, mobile world is taking over, mobile applications are taking over. And I personally feel CTV is having its own swing. With all the OTT shows that I personally watch, I think that is where I live and breathe many a times. So it is important that you as a brand who's trying to connect with this audience member and build this lifelong interaction, and hopefully making sure that this user doesn't take their business to somebody else, because, well, that there is competition out there. You want to ensure that across absolutely any touch point that you deliver today, or you might strategize to have in the future, you have this upfront notice disclosure value exchange that enables you to build trust with this user. It could be an anonymous, unidentified user showing up discreetly on these different interfaces, or it could be a known user propagating their interactions across these different interfaces. You want to make sure that they are delivered maybe with the CMP, where they can accept tracking technologies. If it's a subscription for a newsletter, they are potentially checking a box or understanding your policies around communication. They go into a mobile application and they see a banner, or maybe they are a known user. They already said yes to cookies on the website. Can we translate that over to a mobile app and not resurface the banner? So subtle things and interaction points like that make a huge difference in making sure that your user journey is as seamless and as pleasing as possible. And no matter in the time of the day, if they open up your website or their mobile phones and applications, it's a pleasant journey.
Yeah, you called
Good.
Yeah, no, I said you called it. It does become a pleasant journey because it's being compliant and it's being intelligent. If I interact with you on the website, I'm a person. I look at your app as no different than your website. It's just another touch point. And so you bring up a good point. It's the 80-20 rule. The tech is actually pretty easy. Our integration with OneTrust is really slick. You get it up and running in no time flat. Most of the time, you're going to be spent on discussing the legalese. What does consent mean on this touch point versus the other? Can we do X versus Y, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. And then as you build these touch point journeys, giving users the power to update this from any interface, and then activating those choices in the background, orchestrating that, and ensuring, be it a access or deletion, or just, hey, I absolutely love the kind of personalization you do. Here's a chunk of more data about me, do more fun stuff for me, is what we want to ensure. And that's why when we thought of the title for this, where it's future proofing, it's really to ensure that as your consumers evolve, as the Gen Zs become the people who are making all your audience, and then the alpha, I don't know which next generation is coming through, but the next one coming through, really, they are super hyper aware of these things, and they are wanting to feel important. And this is the way you make them feel important, not just by personalization, but giving them the power to decide how their personalization work. And that in itself is privacy rights and consent.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. That's a great transition to the final slide and tying it all together, Arshdeep. In this flow that you discuss, this is not a left to right. In fact, it's a virtuous life cycle. Consent always changes, and we have to consider that it may change. It's important that we start at the left where collection takes place. This is where the brand greets the consumer on any touch point, any device. You'll notice on this diagram, the OneTrust symbols and logos throughout. A lot of people think of OneTrust as the cookie banner. You're famous for it. It's all over the world. But there's much more than just simply the banner welcoming you. Once the standardization takes place and Tealium technology combines the consent signals with the other identity tokens that we're now seeing proliferating throughout the web. Think of the UID 2.0 for the open web tracking that Galileo from the Trade Desk has. Think of the Ramp ID. They're leading the retail media space when LiveRamp opens up a clean room. These IDs are all part of the puzzle. They're all part of the picture. And how consumers don't know what these IDs mean, they never will. But we can present through a composable interface, such as OneTrust's cookie banner, what that actually means in the human lexicon. And so it starts at standardization when we pick up that consent signal, pick up the identity signals that accompany it, and then the fun stuff starts when we get into the middle. This is where we click yes on profiling so the brand can start to personalize to you. You can read any Forrester or Gartner report. You're going to see the number 15 to 30% increase in revenue, increase in CX as well, if we can personalize to our consumers in the right way. But we can't forget about the IT systems like the Snowflakes, the Databricks that Jeff mentioned earlier on in his opening. They need to be in sync, these warehouses. While warehouses can't touch websites in real time, we're the glue in between that makes sure that these repositories not only have the data, it's secured according to the principles of CPRA or GDPR or any of them, and the stewardship of the data is complete at this point within the brand. But let's not stop there, move to the right. Now that you've got it, why wait, I like to say. In 2018, it was a nice to have that we could move from real time from the white circles on the left to the white circles on the right. It's a must have now. Some of this data in its modality is temporal. For example, conversion API data is only good for a limited time. You have to get it over to Meta or TikTok or LinkedIn ASAP. So a real-time system fueled by consent, guiding the automation is the final OT symbol that you see on the right. We don't need to sit in between and bring up spreadsheets and call up different people from around and spread them around. We can tell the system to move the data to our business units. So they wake up one day, turn on Facebook Business Manager, and there's their data tranche. That's what they have to work with. They trust it, it's reliable, and it's forever in flux. And so this is why it's really important to have that architectural entity in the center that's intelligent and always data mining the consent and working with companies like OneTrust to keep those privacy preferences up to date. So thanks for the conversation, Arshdeep. This was a really a big highlight for me to work with you from OneTrust. And I know that the partnership between our two companies is only going to get better as privacy regulations continue to proliferate globally. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.